I'm going to spend a few minutes just talking about how you can programmatically get an HTML element. There's really two popular ways that you can do it. One is by using the keyword called this, and the other is by using the document object models method called getElementById. When we use this, we can only get the current object. However, when we use getElementById, we can get any element. Okay, so I'm on the Harkness library and I'm looking at Chapter 5, JavaScript Operators, and I go to Special Operators. I'm on page 109, and they talk about an operator called this, and they say it refers to the current object. And I'm really surprised that that's basically all they say about it, because it's super, super powerful, this. So this is the current object. All right, so let's go back to our code. Here I've got this button, and when I click the button, I'm going to call a function called modify using this. And I'm passing it this. So remember, if you go back to that chapter on the operators, this is the current object. And the current object in this instance is my button. So when I call modify using this, I pass my button object as a parameter to this function. So what's really cool is then I can programmatically change my button. I can do all sorts of things. I can change the text, I can change the color, I can do a lot of different things. But here is an example where I'm changing the style, and then the style has multiple properties. Within the style, I'm changing the background color to red. So that's an example of using this to get an element and change its properties. So the other way that you can do it is using getElementById. And I briefly touched upon this in the other video. We're going to talk about it more in a future chapter, but I just wanted to mention it, and if you want to use this method, you can. So here, let's go back to the HTML. I've got a second button where I'm modifying using the DOM, document object model. So I call modify using DOM. The important part, really what I want you to get, is events, because that's what we're talking about this week, is events. So when I click the button, I'm calling a function called modify using event, and I'm wiring up the onClick event. I could have done it with the onMouseOver event or the onMouseLeave event. I could have done a lot of different events, but for this example, I'm using the onClick. So then, notice I don't pass my object. I don't pass button2, but instead, I'm getting the element by its ID. So if I go back to the HTML, this button is uniquely identified by an identifier. So you probably did this in your HTML class. So now, one of the nice things about giving your elements unique IDs is that you can programmatically access them using that ID. So here, I'm using the document object. I'm calling a method called getElementById. I pass it the ID of my button, and that function returns my object, my button object. And then I can do the exact same things that I did before and modify the style. So let's run this and see what it looks like. Okay, so here's my here's the source code up on top, the rendered HTML and JavaScript on the bottom. So I have this button, and I click it. I wired up the onClick event. So when I clicked it, it called modify using this. I passed my button object into the function, and then the function modified the style. So here's my other function called, and it's labeled using getElementById. I click it. It also did the same thing, but it did it differently. So here, I called my function that was wired up to the onClick event. I did not pass it my object, but instead, I modified the object. I obtained the object using getElementById, and then I modified its properties just like I did before. So just to summarize, those are two different ways that you can get an element. So a downside about using this is it's only my current object. Remember what the text said, that it's your current object. So I can only modify this, which is my button object. But the nice thing about using getElementById is you can modify any element. So let's do something and let's add a div. So, okay, so here to my HTML, I'm going to add a div. This is my div element. I'm going to give it an ID of my div. So now what I want to do is I want to do something with that. So I'm going to copy this text and I'm going to declare a variable called my div object. Copy that. I need to get it by its ID, which is called my div. Notice my variable name, my div object, and my ID that I'm getting is different. So then I'm going to change the background color to, let's say, green. All right. So now, when I click the button on button 2, I call modify using DOM, and in this function I'm actually going to modify 2 different HTML elements. I'm going to modify button 2, change that background color to red, then I'm going to change the background color of my div object to green. So let's save that, and hopefully this will work. So that just did my button, and woohoo! So that changed this button to 2, and also the div element to green. So I'll save this, publish the video, and if you have any questions, let me know. Thanks.